Hello, willkommen, bienvenue. It's time for another Armis Inquisition, episode 336, on Sunday, the 7th of July, 2024. I'm Phil.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Matt.
And tonight we're very happy to be joined by Jon Wedger. How are you doing, John? Are you reading?
Really well. Really well. Thank you, gentlemen.
Good. Thanks for agreeing to share your time with us. You're obviously, if someone looks at your website, you've got a lot going on. You're a very busy guy, so we appreciate your time. Now, I think by means of introduction, for people who aren't familiar with what you do, could you maybe give us a bit of background about you and your story and how you've ended up doing what you're doing?
Yeah, I thought really come to prominence for my role as a police whistleblower. We're quite a rare breed, and there's a reason for that. But I'm a retired police detective, but while serving, and what you find, there are quite a few police whistleblowers, but I think I'm the only one publicly who blew the whistle whilst in service. The others, not denigrating anyone, just on a factual level, they sort of squealed on their employer and on the Crown once they got their pensions and retired, and I can't blame them, but I'm different. And the reason that I ended up in that situation was that I was part of Scotland Yard's so-called elite vice unit, and I was working with investigations into child prostitution, and there was a deliberate cover-up of what was going on in the capital. And it was really involved the case of one girl who came forward, which led to another, and ended up in the dozens of young kids, all coming from the care system, who were being pimped out, and they were ranging from 9 to 14 years old. And it was just really their lifestyle, their clients, who was involved, and the fact that the police were deliberately covering it up. And when I sort of not made it public, but I highlighted the plight of these kids, I was threatened by who went on to become one of the UK's most senior police officers, was threatened with the loss of my job, my home, and my children. Being a single parent of 4 young children, that was quite a big deal. If I ever mentioned what was going on with these kids, I sort of initially kept quiet, but then what happened was a turn of events that not one but two of the main child witnesses ended up dying in mysterious circumstances, and I decided to make allegations of corruption, that this is malfeasance in the public office, that this should be in the public domain, and no one has the right to cover this up, and let them cover it up, threaten anyone who exposes it. And so I made allegations of corruptions against 3 senior Scotland Yard detectives for like the historic cover-up of child. Nearly a 4-year campaign, not only to carry out the threats that was given to me, the loss of my job. I was arrested and investigated on 9 occasions. Each one could have given me a prison sentence, the most serious one, 15-year prison sentence. I wasn't paid for nearly 3 years, and then there was an attempt to take my youngest child into care. And so that's what they did. In the end, I kept fighting, and I sort of won. They lost, as it were. I wouldn't recommend anyone even think about taking on the establishment, because you lose, and you lose dearly. Luckily, like my tale had a happy ending, so much as it could do. But then I decided to use my policing skills, where I was a specialist interviewer. I dealt with interrogation, interviewing, witness and suspect interviewing, and basic profiling. I decided to use them skills to go out there and take testimonies in a campaign called The Voice for the Voiceless, of people who'd endured the care system and how it affected their life. And I didn't realise how radically it would change, not just my life, but really sort of public's perception of child abuse and what it does. I started interviewing ex-criminals on why they ended up in prison, and they all came up with the same story, that they were sexually abused as children, went into care homes, were abused, then it led into juvenile offending, which led into adult prison sentences, some of them big sentences. And it was really them that turned their lives around, not the system. But to sort of compound it, I would say 10% of those I interviewed would give the same account, but a more sinister version in respect that they were abused in an environment which we commonly know as satanic ritual abuse. And this is where the worship of a negative deity is used in accordance with horrific sexual abuse and sometimes murder, always bloodletting and sacrifice of animals, but sometimes of young children. And that's when things really took a real turn as well, because there was sort of an underbelly in society that didn't want this exposing. And I came under such a monumental attack for speaking about such realities. And, you know, basically that's how it is now. I sort of carried on. I learned a lot through what I was doing, but I wasn't prepared for the sheer extent of abuse and how many people. I was swamped. I was inundated. Absolutely, I went under with it. I just, to be honest, I couldn't cope with it, and it was massive. And really, how much of society is affected by child abuse, and the fact that there is a real need to speak about it, although it's the most unpalatable topic that there is.
How long were you with the police for, Jon?
I retired with a pensionable service of 27.5 years. So I did slightly less because I ended up on a sick as a result of I went sick because of the bullying, really, and you know what went on. So yeah, I didn't do my full 30, but not shy of it.
It's funny, you know, in the little intro video, I flicked up a little stranger danger meme thing. And I was thinking earlier in the week, I've got a vivid memory from primary school. You'll probably remember, Matt. And periodically, every couple of years or so, maybe, like the local bobby would come in and they'd give a little talk about stranger danger. And it played into that trope of the dirty old man, you know, the packet of sweets, come and have a look at this puppy, lad. Mm-hmm. But it seems that that's sort of that well-worn trope isn't the real danger. It's more organized crime. And
look, what you got to understand about child abuse when we talk about crime and its role that it plays in the whole criminal hierarchy is that on the whole, what the police deal with is mainly crimes of dishonesty and violence, and they tend to be the reserve of the lower and the working classes. And that may sound snobby and judgmental, but to be honest, I don't care because it's how it is. Anyone who's ever policed well, anywhere really, but mainly you know, a working class housing estate area will realise that there'll be one big block of flats or estate where most of the crime emanates from. And out of that estate, there'll be 4 families that just cause chaos. And that's actually historically have always caused chaos. It's intergenerational with this thing. And if you take them out, the system, we used to call it pest control, then actually the area gets a lot better. And you can have people that are like one-person crime waves. So you can attribute poverty and crime. They're symbiotic. They go hand in hand. And it tends to be, like I said, it's an economic thing. It's poor education, it's dysfunctionality, intergenerational dysfunctionality. There'll be child abuse thrown into the mix. Because when people are abused, they have a distrust of society, anger. What you got to understand, anger is trauma. It's unlocked, trapped trauma. So we all know angry people. We've all worked with angry people. They're angry because they have trauma. And a lot of that trauma will be childhood and it will be abuse. And some of that may be sexual. For a man, it can be more compounded because of the taboo of being sexually abused as a man and the demasculinization of it all. When you abuse a child, sexually abuse a child, right? What it does, their emotional clock stops. They can achieve incredibly well when it comes to physical achievements. So you'll get people that are in elite military regiments, for example, that have come from sexual abuse. And there's a very interesting, and again, this isn't a catch-all statement. I'm not saying that everyone in these elite units has come from sexual abuse. I'm not saying that at all. We have to keep a very adult, intelligent mindset about this. But there's a really interesting program, I think Channel 4 did, about the Special Air Service. And they interviewed 5 troopers from there. 3 of them had come from childhood abuse, and 2 had admitted that it was sexual abuse. And also intellectually, people can achieve 110% that have come from abuse. So it doesn't stunt them in that behaviour. So you'll see people that have a need to overachieve, to show the world this is who I am. And you see that in CEOs of business that have got this almost narcissistic, psychopathic mindset. And there's been studies that have been done on it, have shown that this higher tier management, that they've got this I don't care about anyone else, me attitude. And you can attribute some of that probably to narcissism, definitely to child abuse, because if you give a child no love, or you give a child too much love, you're going to create narcissism, and that is a precursor to psychopathy. Okay, but the one thing an abuse survivor can't do unless they have the right therapy, and that's to reason properly, because their emotional clock has stopped. And again, we all know people that if we have a dispute, we are at some point of variance with an individual, and it could be over anything, politics, religion, whatever. He is right, you're right, and you agree to disagree. You wipe your mouths, you shake your hands, whatever you want to say, and you say, okay, you think you're right, I think I'm right, let's have a drink, let's go over it. A damaged person can't do that. It will be F you, I hope you die, F you. Like a petulant child. So the younger the abuse, the more petulant that person is, the more likely that they have that lack of reason. When it comes to like a rational argument, maybe they'll beat you, but when it comes to an emotional battle, they will lose because they are children inside. And like I say, we had this in the workplace or in daily life. When you meet someone, something goes wrong, and this overreaction to it. I hope you die, F you. You look at road rage, for example, when some people just totally lose it. And what's that that famous one with this guy, Ronnie? Do you know I am? Ronnie Pickering or whatever.
Pickering.
It makes me laugh, because, and apparently he's quite a hard nut. And I'm thinking, I don't know the guy, and I'm not going to berate him or anything, but he's showing signs of someone that may have come from childhood trauma.
He might just be a twat.
Yeah. But again, that petulance, that and the hard man thing that goes with it, it's all the fun. But if you can attribute so much of that to poverty and all that, you will get this concentration in these impoverished areas. Child abuse, paedophilia, is so different, because it doesn't know any economic boundaries. It doesn't know any social strata boundaries. It is not one that adheres to religious, restrictions, monetary, nothing. It knows no boundaries. So this is when you get friendships, connections, partnerships, which shouldn't happen. Why do criminals know MPs? Why do MPs know pop stars? I'm telling you now, it's child abuse that connects these dots and connects them together. And we see it. It's the biggest secret society. Don't worry about the Freemasons or Rotary Club or whatever. The most dangerous secret society is the paedophilia. And it's their little secret. It's their thing, the Cosa Nostra of crime. Because that just means my thing in Italian anyway, and this is what it is. So it doesn't go by the normal rules of crime. And this is why we will see people like Fred West that were connected to high-ranking police officers. We will see why Jimmy Savile was connected to the royal family. This is why we see it. We see it again, people like Michael Barrymore, while they had such sway in things. It all comes from that. Now, I'm not saying, because it's never been proven that Michael Barrymore was of that ilk, but I would say he's a man definitely of questionable morals, and he has been named as a Satanist. So that may be another secret society that covers.
Who named you as a Satanist? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's been named by Dr. Joan Coleman. Dr. Joan Coleman was a leading psychotherapist for the Maudsley Hospital, and she would do therapy on survivors of abuse. And the ones that had come from the most traumatic backgrounds all said the same thing. A bit like what I said in my opening gambit there, that 10% will come from this horrific form of abuse known as SRA. And she found that those that had the split personality had all come from the same thing, and it was ritual abuse. So she took every single one of her clients, whatever we want to call them, patients, clients, I don't know, and she made a list of all the people and the places they mentioned. And she did a list to a journalistic standard, which would get rid of any sort of liabilistic issues. So if two or more, so three people, named the same person, she put them on a list. And that went on to form what is known as the infamous RAINS list, RAINS, which is an acronym for Ritual Abuse Information Network Support. And it went on the RAINS list, a highly accurate, yet to be discredited document, in which one of my bosses from the police, Kel Surprise, was named on it. Quite a few police officers, very interesting enough. And Michael Barrymore is named on there as being an active practicing Satanist.
Have any been prosecuted on that list so far, Jon?
Yes, it's really interesting. So if you take the lists that first came out, I think in 1996, and then an updated list came out in 2004, there's quite a few prosecutions that had happened. And you can open source it, and you'll see that some of these names that subsequently have been found guilty of sexual abuse or pornography or whatever. Yeah, so it does check out. It's one of these things that is fascinating, and it's such an underrated list. I mean, I got my MP, who was the policing minister, and I got him to hand it into Parliament. It got handed to Theresa May. Very soon after he handed it to Theresa May, he was sacked as policing minister. A guy called Robert Green, an amazing activist, anti-child abuse activist, handed it to David Cameron, and a few days later he was arrested. And it was believed that this is a bit of paper, or part of the bit of paper, that Philip Schofield handed to David Cameron live on air.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah.
That was when Cameron was on the This Morning couch way back when. It must
That's
be,
it, yeah.
Must be five or 6 years ago now.
And there's another one. There was the head of a children's charity handed the list to David Cameron, and within a week, all the funding to the charity was shut down, resulting in the displacement of 50,000 children in poverty. So it's shocking. So there's definitely something in that, and I was the one who gave that list to the charity person. So there's something in this list, and I would recommend everyone. It's 16 pages, and it really is a who's who into Satanism. It gives dates, times, places. It gives the ins and outs. It gives the full modus operandi of a satanic coven, and it's all based in and around the Hampshire area, mainly the New Forest. And surprisingly enough, Hampshire Police did nothing about it, because the Chief Constable of Hampshire Police, a bloke called Hoodinut, is named on it, as is his assistant Chief Constable. They're both named on it. So there you have it. It's an incredible document.
Well, it makes sense to have the local police on side, doesn't it, if you're going to do heinous shit like that?
It's quite amazing, because about 4 years ago, someone I commissioned compiled a Freedom of Information request on all the, 52 police forces in the United Kingdom, on how many cases in the last 20 years, so we covered really basically the life of the RAINS list, have had cases relating to satanic ritual abuse on it. And it's so telling. Now, the Metropolitan Police said none, 0. Hampshire Police said none, 0. I think David and Powis, whose Chief Constable was also on the list, they also said 0. Every other force came up, some going into the Hertfordshire, into the hundreds. Now, the Metropolitan Police under Cressida Dick, who was a commissioner there. She's just a liar. I've called this woman out a liar in court. So I've got no qualms about calling her a liar at all, especially when it comes to child abuse issues. Right. Under her role, there was a couple of strange, bizarre deaths of children. There was the boy in the Thames, Adam. There was Victoria Climbier. And there was another one, I can't remember. It'll come to me in a minute. Anyway, they went down as ritualistic killings, deaths. So there was a review was done into it, and there was I think was it Project Violet? Project Violet. I'll come to me in a minute. There was an independent inquiry was set up to look into cases of ritual abuse, and the Met Police was seen as having 33 active, investigations into ritual abuse. So where the Met Police get off in saying they've never ever had a case, it's just a big fat lie. That officially they have had many cases, and some of them have resulted in the death of children, and that is a ritual abuse.
For the average person on the street, people just find it so hard to believe that there would be satanic children would be being abused for satanic rituals. People just it just blow people away.
Well, I don't know, because the Bible, in the Christian life, the Bible is full of it. The book of Matthew is all about demonic possession, and if you go into the Old Testament, there are many examples of sacrifice of children. And you say the book of Matthew goes on about it quite a bit, and the book of Luke, they go on about you shouldn't be doing this to children, witchcraft and sacrifice, everything. So in Christian, and again in Islam, they've got the jinns, and that similar thing is mentioned in there. And so on a religious level, it's no surprise. I think as a fallen culture, which is what we are now, a society that has fallen away from any sort of deity worship, the devil just takes up the slack. But we're living in a time where people idolize morons. They idolize sports personalities. They idolize pop stars. They idolize idiots, and they idolize themselves more than anything else. Self-adulation. They are their own gods, which is the premise of Satanism. It's all about the self-worship. So one way or the other, someone's going to take up that slack. And at the moment, it's the devil. And the devil's greatest victory is that people no longer believe he exists. So he's winning either way. But it depends. It really depends. But I think you're going to see a revival. I think you're going to see more and more in this coming into popular culture. And if you look at things like Epstein Island, there's a lot of symbolism, and also how these buildings are constructed. It does represent things like labyrinths, plinths, altars. They all represent some sort of, worship, and maybe sacrificial worship. You've only got to go back to 1980s when, in popular culture, there was a hammer house of horror films. They were all about, a lot of them were about satanic ritual abuse. Actors like Christopher Lee, he's quite an amazing guy. Christopher Lee, who's, a well-known horror actor, but he was an ex-SAS soldier, this fella, and he was given a talk, and someone said to him, "Oh, it's all nonsense, isn't it?" And he really, it was a group of students. He really lays into them. And if you think this is nonsense, then you're talking nonsense. This is dangerous. You must never ever look into it. You must never ever deal with it. It is alive and it will hurt you. Stay away from it. He's on about the occult.
I've seen that. That was quite recent as well. That was from like the early 2000s, I think.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I didn't expect to hear him. I thought he'd be an advocate of it, but he's totally gone against. And we are seeing people coming forward and speaking about it. We're seeing quite a few people that have turned the corner, especially like Mel Gibson is getting quite vocal now, and Mark Wahlberg as well. And so it is out there if you want to. But people like to live in a nice, complacent world and fill their heads full of soft stuff that makes them smile and makes them happy. There's a need to be entertained. So it's up to them, isn't it? But there was a statistic came out from the family court that the government ordered a review into how much abuse is going on in society, and the findings were that childhood abuse affects 25% of the population, and it was overruled by a leading family court judge who said, no, you're wrong. You will find that a more accurate figure is it will affect 33% of the population, a third of the population. So it's just people don't talk about it because it hurts them too much.
That's a staggering figure. That, I mean, 25% to me seems unbelievable. I just, because you've been on the inside, so you've got a better handle on just how prevalent this all is. But like, again, average Joe on the street like me was oblivious to all this that's going on.
The Home Office looked into the prison population, and the under 25s, the lower category prisons, so the Bs and the Cs, they found that 80% of the inmates had come from child abusive environments, backgrounds, 80%. And if we look at this figure of 80% recidivism rate, reoffending rate within our prison system, 80%. But when you look at the Scandinavian and the Nordic way of dealing with it, to do with penal reform, they have a non-offending rate of 80%, because what they do is they deal with, like I mentioned earlier, the broken child. The broken child gets healed, and our system will continue to just be a money-making machine, and we'll have non-offending, and we'll have people just going on into lives of total self-destruction, and not only that, destroying the next generation as well. So child abuse is really shows that it's bolstered up on many sources, right? So when it comes to policing, we're looking at a victim of child abuse will go on to create issues for the next 3 generations. Social services have their findings that people who have been abused go on to cause problems for the next 3 generations. There is a greater propensity for someone who's been abused to go on to abuse. I'm not saying that all victims of abuse are abusers. I'm no way saying that. And my words have been twisted before, so I categorically make that very, very clear. But the prevalence of it is greater. So most people who abuse have been abused, And also when you look at religious doctrine, they go on about familial spirits, intergenerational abuse of 3 generations. So they all keep this 3 generations. So you don't just, it's not just you who destroys if you don't get treatment. It goes on and on. You will make your children and their children's children suffer. And one active sex offender paedophile in their lifetime can cause 120 victims. Now, in return, if they go on to hurt, there was a study done in Belgium, and they found that one guy indirectly had caused 2,000 victims because of his abuse of children. So it's massive, but people don't talk about it, but when people do, there's a healing element to this. But the problem we have now is that, and this is something that I try and raise, that the police should be having child abuse as its number 1 policing priority. Number 1, right? And when a paedophile is convicted, it's the best form of healing the victims will ever get. But unfortunately, historic child abuse cases, and historic is anything over 72 hours, historic child abuse cases have a 2% success rate in our courts. And that's all they have, a 2% success rate. Similar to stranger rate, 2%. So it's shockingly low. They put more emphasis on gender-related crime than they ever have done on child abuse. And gender-related crime accounts for some negligible 0.001% of crime. It's absolutely shocking. And when I blew the whistle and I was removed from the only dedicated unit, albeit temporary, to looking at childhood care home pimping out sexual exploitation, when I was threatened I was threatened by a senior officer, and what he said to me was that this can never, ever get out. If this ever gets out, sorry for the background noise, if this ever gets out, right, you will lose your home, your job, and your children. You must shut your mouth, right? And then I was told if I ever mentioned a word of it to anyone, I would be thrown to the wolves. This must not and will not ever get out. You have no idea who you're dealing with. And at the time I didn't, but I was able to find out I did have a bit of an idea who I was dealing with. And it is this underbelly in society that has a proclivity to utilise children for sexual advantage. And from that day that I blew the whistle when they shut down the operation, and for the next 7 years, the Metropolitan Police never ever pursued or prosecuted one case of child sexual exploitation until they were shamed and embarrassed into doing so post the death of Jimmy Savile. And it was really Jimmy Savile was the lever, the Watergate, whatever it might be, the thing that changed this, changed the whole policing environment into this. And that was really out of total and utter embarrassment because the establishment had never, ever addressed it. And as a result, we ended up with seeing this whole plethora of independent inquiries under the auspice of the IICSA, the Independent Child Sexual Abuse, of which I gave evidence. And as a result of my evidence, 5 points of law have now been changed for the better for child safeguarding. And we had care home after care home cases linking out, and they're interesting when you look into these care home cases, and you actually see the algorithm of not only how grooming works, but how the whole conspiracy of silence to do with child sexual abuse works, and those involved. So society should never scratch its head and wonder, how does this happen? How can it be allowed to happen and all that? It's there in your face if you dare to look at it. Once you lift up that rock and you see this underbelly, you can never, ever pull it back, and your life will never be the same again. But it's best not to look.
John, can you break that down for us? Like you mentioned the algorithm there, so that how the silence is maintained.
Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. So if we look at care homes, child homes, foster care, and everything else, right? The children are the only victims. So it happens on many levels. Children are a cash cow. They're the gift that keeps on giving, right? From cradle to grave, if we talk about the judicial system, children will always deliver. So Tony Blair caused a huge spike in child abuse. I think he's a man of unbelievably questionable repute. This man, I think he's evil, to be honest. But he brought in the Any Child Matters back in 2006, maybe something like that, and it changed the whole landscape in respect to kids taken into care. Right, I'll predate that with a few other things. So before, social services were funded by the Home Office. So even if they ran into the red, the Home Office would bail them out. So certain areas will have a more of a need for childcare funding, impoverished areas, without a doubt, right? I hate this saying, it makes me sick, and I find it immature, I find it irresponsible and just disgusting. It is this baby father, baby daddy. It appalls me. It just shows no responsibility to looking after what is your most precious gift, and that's your children. And the presence of a step parent puts the risk of that child that's under that jurisdiction, that step parent, puts it at risk by 30 times, not 3 times, 30 times. The child is 30 times more likely to be sexually abused with the presence of a step parent. And of course, we see so much of this now, this baby daddy, baby father culture, step parenting. I was a step parent to 2 boys. I'm not saying all step parents are bad. There's some brilliant step parents, and there's some brilliant foster parents, and there's some brilliant adoptive parents. But they're unvetted, and there's some bad ones out there. And paedophiles are very patient, very intelligent, very manipulative, very predatory, okay, and very patient people. Now, when the funding was withdrawn, Tony Blair turned around and said that you will be funded, but every time a kid's getting taken into care, we will credit that social services by £45,000. So initially, the parameters of taking a kid into care were the same, but then they become very quickly overzealous, and they realise that there's a huge amount of money to be made by just taking kids into care, especially when you're dealing with the low and the working classes, where there is ignorance to the law, there is lack of funds to be properly legally represented, and they would just believe in what they were told by sinister social workers, overzealous social workers, and this predation on kids going into care. And they made it into an industry which should never have been, and it became a money-making machine. So kids were being put into care. They are then, like I said, 30 times more likely than to be abused. They're never going to be loved as much as a parent can love them. However, let's get it right. 80% of all sexual abuse of kids goes on in the home by the parents. So not all parents are good. And kids are sometimes taken into care because that is the safest place for them to be. Okay. Right. And then we look at the care homes. So we would get these organised, they call them cottage homes. They sprung up post-war. And there was a lot of orphans post-war, and they went into these homes. And there was a lot of abuse during the 50s and 60s. And we've not seen the likes of it since, really. It petered out by women on children. And when a woman sexually abuses a child, that child is 6 times more likely to offend than if a man does it. How shocking is that? And women abuse, when they sexually abuse, now women only account for 7% of sexual abuse on a gender level, right? But when they do abuse, it is done with a spitefulness that you don't get with men. And it's torturous. And there was what they call war widows. There was many of these women that had lost their husbands, their fathers, and their sons to war, and they become very spiteful and embittered, and basically had a hatred of men. And you saw a lot of boys getting abused by women during that period. It changed coming on to the advent of the 1970s to men. Men were still abusing back then, of course they were, but we then saw more now proliferation in the 70s of men doing it. And the majority of care home abuse went on in left-wing constituencies. This is very interesting. And all this is factual. All this came out of the independent inquiry findings. It's all there on open source, so check it out. And what they found was that equality laws came in, and left-wing boroughs, they would not check the references to any homosexual applicant. Now, I'm in no way saying that homosexual men are child abusers. I'm not. Let's get that right. But let's stick with the facts. So they weren't checking it, so because it was seen as discriminatory. So a loophole occurred where a homosexual paedophile could lie about their convictions, their cautions, their brushes with the law, their sexual intentions towards children, and not be checked out. So it became a haven. And this was proved with the South London care home Shirley Oaks, where at one point during the 70s, there were 19 known paedophiles working in that care home with unfettered, unsupervised access to children. You see? So this is what went on. Now, what we're finding is it's more of even more of an industry, but it's gone to private concerns. So care homes now tend to cater for like 4 or 5 kids. They get paid £2,000 per child per week for them children, and they do nothing to care for them. And this is where a lot of the grooming will go on. These homes will be targeted. The young girls mainly will be the victim for them. And then they would encourage the young girls, the pimps, the young Romeos, to get their friends to make allegations against their parents so they could be put in care. They could then be taken outside of the parental responsibility of the home. The parental responsibility will then, and the residence order will be given to local authority. So parents could not chastise the kids. The girl will be put in care home, and she would then start getting pimped out herself. And this is what went on and on. So the children will make money through the family courts. The children that have been abused tend to become very withdrawn, angry, not doing well at school because the hypervigilance goes through the roof. So they won't be sleeping so much during the day, but they'll be exposed to criminality. Drugs is one of the main elements. I will never, ever have anyone tell me that cannabis is harmless. It is the gateway drug, which is used mainly to coerce the kids. From the cannabis, then they get them onto the class A's, and that is when they've got them. Once they get onto the crack and heroin, and then that is one way which the kids were paid. I'll go on a bit more about the case I dealt with in a minute to show you how that went on. And then they've got the kid working, but then you'll get crime will get caught up. The kids will get caught up in crime. So the money is made from the juvenile courts. They then, when they attain the age of criminal responsibility, they become a legal adult, age of 18. Then the magistrates' courts will start making money from them. Solicitors, £400 an hour minimum, £8,000 per day per trial that the courts make out of them. And then from there, the Crown Court, the prison system, and ultimately it's the coroner's court will make money. So that, and these people will then end up not working properly because they have a distrust for management. Anyone who has any governance over them will abuse it, because anyone who ever has done has always abused it. But there's a very sadder aspect to this. I got a phone call 2 weeks ago, and I've always spoke about this. And this guy rang me up and he said, "Look, John, I'm an ex-criminal. I was in a care home as a young boy, pushed around, same story, heard it 1,000 times, without watering down his testimony, but I have." He said, "You say something," and he said, "You broke my heart when you said it in your interview." And he said, "You actually saved me because I was very suicidal and no one really understood." He said, "But when you talk about getting jobs, a lot of us men that have suffered abuse, we can't work like normal people." I said, "I know." I said, "Are you self-employed?" He went, "Yeah." Now, if I said to anyone out there, what self-employed people, are they a lot of them victims of abuse? And they'd go, "Oh, rubbish." But a lot of victims of abuse do become self-employed. Now, I bet no one here knows the reason other than the fact that coercive control. But there is a sadder reason why. When a young boy is sodomized by a grown man, his sphincter muscle is damaged irreparably, unless they get. The older they get, they no longer have control over the sphincter muscle. Now, an anus is not like a vagina. A vagina is like a wall of muscle that opens and contracts and can open to colossal size and go back to a normal size. While women can have 20 children and still keep a relatively same, without sounding vernacular, size vagina. You can't do that to an anus. An anus is a sphincter muscle. It's a ring of chains of muscles. They all interlink like that and they form a chain. And when you violate that, you rupture that chain. Now, it physically might look the same, but it physically isn't the same. It can no longer do its job. Hence, that person will defecate themselves. So can you imagine being a grown man working in an office and all of a sudden you defecate yourself and you smell? How embarrassing, how demeaning, how uncomfortable, how heartbreaking. So it's better that they work on their own, and they'll do it at night sometimes. And it's embarrassing because their partner thinks that they've proved themselves that, but it's what happens. I had one of the most prolific armed robbers in the UK come to me because I mentioned it. He said, "John, you're right." He said, that happens to me even to this day. And a hard man, a very, very hard man, a dangerous guy. And he said a lot of it was from it. But this guy rang me up and he burst into tears when he heard me say it. He said, I told my wife, "See, there's others. This guy's just told us there's others." He said, "You're the only one who has ever mentioned it." Now, I'm not taking no pedestal for any of this. I'm just saying the truth. We need to hear the truth. When you say society doesn't hear about this, why not? Why does society? They need to know. We need to know the horrors of child abuse. Women get misaligned wombs. They have difficulty having children, but when they've been abused, raped by a grown man's penis in a little girl's vagina, it misaligns a womb. It destroys, when they've been anally raped, sodomized, it destroys their spine. It causes spinal problems. You know, not only that, they end up with infections that sometimes don't even get treated, which can cause horrific problems later on in life and can be terminal. But also mentally and spiritually, it destroys them. A lot of people, they don't have proper relationships. They can't maintain a relationship. They're going to be abusive in their relationships. They're going to be promiscuous. And there will be that percentage which will go on to abuse themselves. I've spoken to kids that have been made to have sex with animals. You know, I've had paedophiles ring me up. Paedophiles ring me up and give me their testimonies. One guy, he wanted me to interview him, and I said, I can't do that. He said, you'll think I'm an animal. I said, no, God will judge you. I won't judge you. And he told me what they did to him as a kid. They used to daily put him in a cage in a kid's home and all sit around and masturbate, these men, whilst he was put in a cage and sodomized by an Alsatian dog. And then he went on to... Now, what is that man going to be as an adult? He went on to abuse his own daughter. And he told me that. So it's about having that level of understanding. I'm not flying a flag for pedos. No way. I want people to understand this is what goes on. This is why you get angry people. This is why you go to a Tesco's, to a cash machine, and there's a heroin addict. Do you know 90% of heroin addicts come from abuse? 90%. You think that dirty junkie's out there again. Well, what's their story? Where have they come from? When I was a detective, I used to teach for 3 years. And I said, if you want to catch a big criminal, I said, go and have a word with the beggar, the shoplifter, the heroin addict. Now, no one wants to go there because they're skanky, they're dirty, they call them nitty now. I don't know, that's the word, nitty. You know, they've got scabies, they might be mentally ill. But they'll give you, once you get their trust, they'll give you the name of those who abuse them as kids. And therefore, you've got a paedophile. And if they give you 2, you've got a paedophile ring. So now, if we go on about the algorithm, so this is the kids' home, right? And a lot of them residents will go on to commit crime, and that crime will escalate. And therefore, we've explained the justice system. And therefore, we've just explained 80% of the prison population. All right? So when you get the Home Secretary's tough on crime, we're going to get tough on crime. Well, why not get compassionate and find out why they do it? People need to be punished, rightly so. You know, and if someone commits a crime of violence, then they should have a violent takedown. I get that. But once you've got them and you've got them detained, find out what broke in them. Find out what it is, because you'll find a lot of these tough people, they ain't so tough. They're frightened children. Frightened children. I see it all the time. I remember years ago watching a video, and I'm not denigrating the guy. You know, I watched this fella, Aaron Lambo, who's a big social media guy, he's a big musty fella, and he's got tattoos on his face. I knew from the moment I saw him, he'd come from abuse, from care home abuse. I knew the moment I saw him. I see so many of these podcasts with these gangsters. I know they've come from abuse. They might not say it, but I know they have. I know exactly where they've come from. There was the inquiry's just concluded into the care home abuse in Scotland, right? And it's incredible. The Scottish have a different mentality. Scotland was one of the most reluctant places to build children's homes, because they rightly so said the best place for children is in the home, whereas the English will quite happily chuck their kids into homes, and we'll cover that in a minute, right? Whereas Scotland, they were like, no. So they started these anthropologists, these these benevolent people. I can't remember the name. There's a name they get from philanthropists. That's it. You know, like Dr. Bernardo. You know, Dr. Bernardo. They changed the name to Bernardo's. It used to be called Dr. Bernardo's Cherry. Under the government inquiry, Dr. Bernardo sold 40,000 children into sexual slavery and domestic servitude in what was classed as a new world. 40,000, the biggest trafficker of children. I hope that guy's rotting in hell. He sold them to Canada, to New Zealand, to Australia, and they went into sexual slavery. And we saw that in cases like the Bindon Boys. If you ever want to see it explained, watch a film called Sunshine and Oranges. It's a very, very sad story of the abuse that kids from care homes, such as Bernardo's, were sold to the monasteries in Australia, and they were just raped and used for cheap labour from the age of 8 years old. Canada, New Zealand, it all went on, right? So these people set up homes. They got money for doing it. Scotland started setting them up, right? And there was one called Fornethi in Perthshire, right? And Fornethi was for girls, and it was to give respite to young girls, mainly from impoverished areas of Glasgow. And they were literally just chucking these girls in for absolutely no reason. It might be the mother was sick, so they said, "Oh, we'll help you out," and they put the girl in there for a minimum term, which ended up being extended because they'd get money for it. It's all about the money, perversion of money. And these girls were put into Fornethi, and they were treated appallingly bad by the female staff, not the male staff, the female staff. They were beaten, they were whipped, they were caned. Young girls, a lot of them came from loving, caring homes. They were unaccustomed to this, from very young infant school age. Can you imagine being divested from your loving home, put in these homes, having your hair pulled, beaten, whipped every night? If you wet the bed, you got it. And then at night, men would come in and they would select the girls, and they were then taken and they were drugged, and they were taken to a big posh house. And they all said the same thing. There'd be these men there smoking pipes, very well spoken, and they would be raped, and they would be brought back in the morning, and they would horrific injuries, and would have things like syphilis and injuries, like young girls that weren't used to this, right? And if they said anything, they were whipped and beaten, right? And a lot of these women went on to have horrific mental health problems, alcoholism. I've spoken to a few of the survivors. What happened when the inquiries came forward, like Jimmy Savile, really, and the people started speaking out, it's happened to us, and a lot of survivors of Fornethi, and they got a survivor group together, and they all mentioned the same one. And it turned out the guy was a name called Nicholas Fairbairn, QC, Queen's Counsel. Nicholas Fairbairn, right, was the advocate depute. Now, the advocate depute is the highest legal rank you can get in the country. It's appointed by the government. If you kill the advocate depute, it's one of the offences where you'll be sentenced to death. One of the few offences, that and treason. If you commit treason or arson in a naval dockyard, or you kill an advocate depute, you'll be hung. He was in charge of their version of the Procurator Fiscal, their version of the CPS. He was the main one that was organising the parties and raping these young girls. Him and his friend Bob Henderson, and they run this powerful legal firm in which they would represent many paedophile cases, and many high-profile paedophile cases were dropped at the hands of Bob Henderson and Nicholas Fairbairn. That's my mate, right? And they were this is what happened, and they were in charge. Now, something even more sinister come about. Nicholas Fairbairn was classed as an eccentric, right? Because he used to wear a kilt and had this impressive collection of rare whiskies, right? He was a pisshead and a paedophile. He had a long-standing sexual affair with Esther Ransom. Esther Ransom set up Childline. Now, when I worked in child abuse investigations, so Scotland Yard's child abuse command unit, right, we have a referral system. So we get information coming from schools, from social services and all that. We'd have a meeting, multi-agency meeting, and then we'd go and arrest the perpetrator. All the time, out of the hundreds of cases that I was involved in, our unit only ever dealt with 2 cases. We was one of the busiest child abuse units in the country. 2 cases from Childline. What was happening to all that information them kids were ringing up? That number was everywhere. Every phone box, on police cars, on bog walls, everywhere. What happened to it? So I'm now explaining how the justice system covers it up, right? How high-profile cases cover it up. Now let's look at Nicholas Fairbairn. Not just him. Let's look at someone else who was never convicted but alleged. Right, was our Home Secretary. Right, it's just gone straight out of my mind.
Which one?
Leon Britton.
Oh.
Right, Thatcher's Home Secretary, Leon Britton. He was alleged on many occasions of sexual abuse. Right, he was mentioned in the independent inquiry. But let's take Nicholas Fairbairn. Nicholas Fairbairn was abandoned by his mother. His father was a laird, a lord, a wealthy landowner. They lived in a castle. His mum didn't want him. His dad was just a drunken, adulterous, whatever he might be. And Nicholas Fairbairn was placed into one of these residential preparatory schools, posh boarding schools, as you will. Right. He then went on to one called Loretto, right, which was his primary stroke midterm secondary school. Loretto College was exposed for electrocuting young boys, whipping them, putting them in a pit and urinating on them. These were the masters, sodomizing them, degrading them, starving them, freezing them. Now, for a minute, gentlemen, just take, for example, if you've got a puppy dog and you electrocuted it, you put it in a hole and urinated on it, you beat it, you sodomized it, you starved it, right? You caned it daily. Do you think that's going to be a loving, kind, loyal dog? There wouldn't be a human being would get his hand near that animal without it ripping it off. So this is the emotional state of people like Nicholas Fairbairn. And their sexual orientation and their likings and their wants and their dislikes sexually are so twisted and perverted. Yet society has to see that they get married, because back then it was illegal to be a homosexual. It was frowned on in business, in politics. Now, not so much, right? So they lived a lie. Leon Britton went on to become the most successful and youngest Home Secretary we ever had. Many, many allegations of abuse was met out against him. We had the head of our intelligence services, Sir Peter Heyman, got convicted of child abuse issues, right? He was head of MI6. Now, where's the relevance there? Well, I will explain it. Years ago, if you was a homosexual, right, it could be used against you. You could be open to blackmail. Even now, vetting for top secret positions. I've been the subject of top secret vetting, right? I had to disclose everything about my life, every single sexual partner I've ever had. I passed vetting. I was told by the sergeant in charge of the vetting unit at Scotland Yard at the time, not many homosexuals pass vetting because of their sexual proclivities, right? Their promiscuities and things like that. People who are involved in dating websites don't pass vetting. People who are involved in swinging do not pass vetting, right? Because it opens you up to blackmail, right? So how comes our Home Secretary, who was monitored by the intelligence services, was allowed to get this position, when there was allegations of child abuse against him? Our own Prime Minister, Ted Heath, there were 33 allegations of rape against him under Operation Conifer. And the police officer that had that operation, that was running that operation, he contacted me many years later and said, John, they've destroyed me. The intelligence services and the police destroyed him because of what he exposed our government to. The last 5 prime ministers, their PAs, their personal assistants, their political assistants, right, have been accused of or suspected of child abuse issues, or some convicted of them. There was one, Patrick Rock, I think it was Cameron's PA, was convicted of child abuse. Now, if someone's an adulterer, it can be used against them. But now, does it matter? If someone's an adulterer, they're seen as a player, aren't they? If you're gay, what does it matter? In fact, it's probably a positive move if you're gay in respect to promotion in some aspects of employment. Cocaine use used to be, oh, no. Well, look at them all. George Osborne and And many others have been accused of sniffing it. George Osborne was accused of sniffing it off a prostitute and all sorts of things. They're still in their job. A police officer would have been sacked, but they're still in their job. A politician can keep their job as long as that they don't serve anything 1 day over a year in prison. It's disgusting, right? There are politicians that are on the sex offenders register. There are politicians that are convicted for drink driving, for domestic violence, for theft. Loads of them. There's quite a few. There's a list that's out there that shows it on. But the one thing that's still taboo, although they're trying to change, is paedophilia. When they've done anthropological studies and they've gone to remote villages, there was one done in the Amazon and there was one done in Papua New Guinea. Even in these remote, lawless places, right, anyone who's accused or suspected of fiddling with a child sexually is banished to the jungle for a period no less than 2 years. Well, that's a death sentence because no human being can survive in them environments alone for more than 2 years. And if they do, they are at the bottom of the social pile when they come back into society. So even in these lawless places, they see child abuse as one of the most dangerous things that can be allowed to carry on in society, right?
John,
and it's the same.
Sorry, John.
If I just finish this one point, and you'll get this right. Now, if you know someone is a paedophile, there's information that they are using the sexual services of a child. And I'll go on a little bit, I'll finish this bit and I'll let you talk. Now I'll go on about what I uncovered, right? That can be damaging to the political stability of a country. Vladimir Putin even mentioned it. He said the UK's politics is full of paedophiles. If you know a politician is a paedophile, they can be bent any way you want. And therefore the intelligence services take on jurisdiction. And they can impose what's called a D notice. And a D notice will stop any press agency from putting the truth out there. Now, you've got to look at a D notice. No one even knows. You're journalists, you may well have heard of a D notice, but you know what it is. A D notice stands for defense notice. It is a tool that is only used by the intelligence services, the military intelligence services. So why are they using it on civilian journalists? Right? Why aren't the police allowed to use it? Because the intelligence services take over. And then that's when they step in and that's when they shut things down. But what if you have the head of that intelligence services is a paedophile? Well, we had that with Sir Peter Heyman. Was caught out and he was found on the guest list of Elm Guest House. He was on it. And he was a member of an organisation called PI. And that's an acronym for Paedophile Information Exchange. It was a pro-left-wing political organisation that was annexed to the Labour Party. Yeah. And it was endorsed by 3 female politicians, Harriet Harman, Margaret Hodge and Patricia Hewitt. One of them went on to be appointed by Tony Blair as Minister for Protection of Children. This is how it gets covered up. Yeah, please go ahead.
That was back in the 70s, wasn't it, Pi, when that was run? Was it back in the 70s?
Yeah, well, it continued all the way through. It went through into the 80s. And there were many politicians on there. And head of the Boys Brigade, I think, or the Scout Association, one of them was on there.
Yeah, John, I was just going to say, I mean, this is all way beyond my pay grade, and I'm exhausted. Divisive guests we've had on the podcast ever.
Taking it all in.
The chat is fizzing with discussion around this. What I wanted to ask is, I mean, you've clearly gathered a lot of information. You had a long career, 27 years in the police force. At what point did you decide that you'd heard too much and you wanted to blow the whistle, and why not sooner?
Yeah, right. So I was one of a couple of officers that we were on Vice. So we was on the elite Vice unit, who's I think Detective Chief Inspector before ended up on the range list. So that says something. But me and a female detective were brought in one day and we said, look, there's a young girl. She was 13, 14 years old. Keeps making an allegation, calling the police. She's in a care home and she was in a secure unit, saying that she's being pimped out, or she was being pimped out by a prostitute, by a woman prostitute, what we call a known common prostitute, which the police were well aware of. And it turned out that 15 years prior, this prostitute was active in grooming young girls. And who better, a girl to groom, a woman to groom young girls? It's the perfect storm. So we went to see her, and my briefing was, get rid of her, she's a liar. So I went to see this young girl, and I sat down with her, and at first meeting, she wasn't the most pleasant of kids, because, we see these NSPCC adverts of these sweet, dear little cute kids that are in the corner huddled up and, cuddling their teddy, and they're the victim. But a lot of the kids, some of them, they're rough kids, they're not the most user-friendly kids. And she was definitely one of them, a little gangster girl. And she started telling me that I get picked up, I get taken to this hotel, I get taken here, I get taken there, I get swapped around the crack house for crack, I get taken to posh places, there's police involved, there's this involved, there's that involved. And I thought, well, she sort of makes sense. She said, I'm not lying, John, I'm not lying. I'll show you. Get me out of here, I'll show you. So we did. We put her in a car and drove us around, and she showed us. So she said, it's not just me, there's another girl. I'll give you my mate's name. So her mate was even younger than her, smaller than her. And her mate said exactly the same. He said, look, there's others. And it went down. The youngest one was 9 years old. And it was across the board. But these were all kids that were in care. So it was every single colour. We had Asian girls. We had travellers. We had black girls, white girls, everything. Right? But they were all from the care system or had care orders. They were all being monitored by social services, right? As a place of safety and everything else. So, and they were coming to notice the police as missing persons and everything. So they were known to the system. And they all started saying the same thing. And then they started saying that there's a judge involved, and the girl running it, she's in with police, and it all checked out. And so the MO would be that mainly heroin addicts, their daughters would be preyed on, some boys, and this woman prostitute would supply them drugs and take the young girl out and do her hair for her and tell her she's beautiful, and then she'd give them a bit of cannabis. That's how it all started, with cannabis. And then from there, start giving them a bit of crack, and then start showing them porno films. And then she'd say, look, we can earn some money. And she'd go to a hotel with a girl and get a punter to have sex with her while the little girl watched. And then said, well, if you want to earn some money, you can have a go, and I'll give you half the money. And that's how it started. And these kids come from...
Sorry, at what point did you get to action, John, and start slapping cuffs on people? Because the details are harrowing, and you're going through them in great detail. Yeah.
So, well, we had to get the evidence. It's like any major inquiry, you need the evidence, and there was a lot of obstruction as well that was going on. So what we did was we had to, once we started the arrest phase, you had to make sure every child was in protective custody. Right, because some of these were very vulnerable, and we had to move kids to different parts of the country. So there was logistically it was a big operation. We had to have surveillance, and then we took out two of the main players, and we got them remanded in custody. We had phone monitoring in the prison, and we had to keep them remanded. So we was constantly fighting legal battles all the time. And we had to then safeguard the kids. The kids were then going missing. The kids then, what also happened was that they then started coming down from the drugs, because they were no longer getting supplied drugs. So they would go missing and go back on the street, and some were pimping themselves out to get the heroin to deal with that. So it was, and we were massively under-resourced. But I had to put in the information. So what the girls were telling us was that they were being taken to a crack house, passed around for crack. They were then taken to hotels, and then they were taken to posh restaurants. And then they started giving us details of clients. And some of these, one involved someone in the court system, a judge, someone high up in the BBC. There was police officers involved at a high level. So the moment I put that information forward, that's when I got sanctioned. I got brought before a very, very high-ranked officer, and that's when I was threatened. The threats I gave you: you've got to shut your mouth, you can't say anything, boom, boom, boom. We'll take your children off. My children were still young, and they shut down the inquiry straight away. Now, and I
Did
was
you
moved.
complain about that to his
Yeah. Well.
or her
I'm going to give you. I'm going to educate you now. How when you complain. So I was then told, "Do you think you've been unfairly treated?" And of course, it's appalling. I said, "Of course." He said, "Yeah, you need to make a complaint, John. Fill out a grievance form, the grievance procedure." He said, "Do you know how it works?" I said, "Well, I've never complained about an officer before." He went, "Yeah, well, everyone's asked, they give statements." He said, "There was a witness in the room, she'll be asked for a statement, and it will go round, it will get ratified, it will get stamped off, and then it will come before me." I went, "Okay." He said, "You know what happens then?" I went, "No." He says, "It goes in that effing bin there," points to a bin. He said, "I or no other senior officers will betray each other." Right? And that's how it works. Who do you go to? Who do you turn to? I'm then told I'm going to lose my children. Right? I'm going to lose my home. I'm going to lose my job. Right? What would you do? And then I'm removed from the unit. Now, I get them moved. I'm scared. I'm telling you now, I'm scared. He tells me you have no idea who or what we're dealing with. Right? Now, I had a friend who whistleblew whilst in the flying squad, and he got imprisoned. Right? So I'm well aware. I watched once. It's a brutal factory. I watched once where a guy spoke out about a detective inspector. Right? We went out for a drink, and this detective inspector went up to him, punched him so hard in the face, his eye, his cheekbone shattered. His eye went into his eye and blinded him. No one said a word. He had to be pensioned off because he was blinded. That's what happens in the police. The military will be very, very similar, right? And you rely on them for everything. And who you're going to say, see, what you got to understand with the police is that you spend your career. I'm not saying I did this. Read between the lines with whatever I say with this. But you spend your career sometimes bearing false witness. Sometimes officers, what happens and what writes down is not usually the truth, right? And there's one thing the police teach you to do, and that's to lie. And they're good at it. And they're a pack animal, right? So good luck with that one, right? How it changed me when I really dug my heels in, I then moved to a child abuse unit in North East London, which was the busiest child abuse unit in the country. And on my first day, I was told that there's no such problem here. I had to take an undertaking with the officer who threatened me, never to look into child prostitution again. In my first posting, within 10 minutes, I started looking into it. I rang up the kids' home. I was told there was no child prostitution on that borough. I rang up 23 care homes. I got a list of them, rang them up, and said to the guy, "I'm Detective so-and-so." I said, "How many kids you got?" He went, 5. I said, "How many did you lose at the weekend to prostitution?" He went, 3. So within 5 minutes, I found 3 kids. Within 10 minutes, I found 10 kids. By the end of 3 days, I found 52 children. 52 children that were being pimped out when I was told there ain't any. Right? What happens is the case against the prostitute, she's now on remand. She goes before the Crown Court, and that gets going. Right? She does get convicted. She gets given 15 years in prison. But my 2 witnesses, over a short period of time, were both found dead. One was found dead with a suspicious overdose in the Liverpool area, and the other one a bit further down, I think in Hereford. And that broke me. That really broke me. Jimmy Savile had been exposed. I was a mess. I was drinking heavily. I become really paranoid. I end up with PTSD. I couldn't handle rank. I can't even now. If you was to ring me up and then send me a message, you call me John, right? It might be innocent. I will not call you back. I need to know exactly why you want to talk to me. Otherwise, I'm not engaging. That's how I am. I'm with authority and everything. I stand for none of it now. Absolutely none of it. I will not take an inch of authority now. I'm quite hard to manage now because of it, really.
What happened to your old boss, John? Is he still in post?
No, well, I'll explain what happened there. I'll explain what happened. This shows a bit like, remember, take the Nicholas Fairburn situation I explained earlier, take that into account. And then take the range list and the senior officers that mentioned there, take all that into account. Jimmy Savile gets exposed. And then I get invited to Parliament by a member of Parliament called Simon Danchuk. He ended up writing a book about the Dolphin Square abuse. He wrote a fantastic book about the abuse that went on there. And he said, look, I hear that, because I got quite well connected to journalists and things like that. And anyway, so he invites me to Parliament. He said, look, you're not alone. And he puts me in touch with a detective in Manchester who was exactly the same thing happened to this detective over the Rochdale scandal. I then get put in touch with probably the bravest officer I've ever met. And he was quite a senior detective called Lenny Harper. And he looked into the abuse at the Hope de la Garenne care home. And he went through exactly the same. And he said to me, the tentacles of this go right to the heart of the establishment. Be very, very careful, John. Very, very careful. But what it did for me, it kept me alive. It made me realise I wasn't alone. I thought I was alone. And this is the thing with whistleblowing and bullying. You get isolated and you think you're alone. I was totally detached from my policing community. My friends were too frightened to come near me. I was put under surveillance. It was awful. I went sick. They was meant to pay me. They stopped paying me. I never had an income for 3 years. I went downhill very quickly, and I had my children. I couldn't maintain my mortgage payments. So I was told, you'll lose your home, your job. I made allegations of corruption after this, malfeasance in the public office. I made official allegation to the Met Police. It's really strange because they've got a corruption command. And I said, I must speak with a senior woman detective. And they put me in touch with a uniformed male officer. I said, no, you can F off. There was no way. I want to see it. And I kept going on and on and on. In the end, this woman, Detective Chief Inspector, says, I'll talk to you, John. Come and meet me. So I met her. And she said, why have you stipulated a female woman detective? And I said, Ma'am, you can't roll up your trouser leg. And she just burst out laughing. And she said, I get you. Now, years later, that drama series, Line of Duty, the last series is about child abuse cover-ups. And that line is used perfectly in that series, years after my disclosure. So someone's has knowledge of my case and I believe has nicked it. So I made allegations and I got treated as a vulnerable and intimidated witness. So they couldn't touch me. So nothing really happened. And then what happened was the National Crime Squad, the government took the inquiry off of the Met Police and gave it to the National Crime Squad. They then, the three main officers that I implicated, it's gone through the civil court, so there's a clause on me of what I can and can't say with this. So they did investigate them. What they did was they rung them up and they said, Jon Wedger's saying that you're covering up child abuse allegations. Is this true? And they went, no. And they shut down the inquiry. So the National Crime Squad shut it down within days. That then took away my protected status. So the moment that got shut down, I got a call from an MP and said, John, this has all gone wrong. You've got to be careful. I then, over a period of months, got arrested for 9 different offences. They were crazy. I got arrested for theft of an A4 sheet of paper. I got arrested for conspiracy to supply Class A drugs, threats to kill. Oh man, there was loads of them, 9 of them. The theft of an A4 sheet of paper made me laugh, but the conspiracy to supply Class A drugs, they said, we've got evidence of you're going to get 15 years. And when you saw the evidence, it was an absolute joke. I can go into it with that one. I had a friend he's an author now, and he wrote a brilliant book about his life as an undercover officer. We worked together on covert work. And he had a legend. He used to live as a tramp on the street. You'd never know. This guy had tattoos and He had a little dog and he used to piss himself and everything. He was one of the most successful undercover officers they had. But a lot of them, they go crazy. There's too much for them to deal with, and they have nervous breakdowns, and he had a nervous breakdown. And he went to pieces and left the police. And he always used to have a little bottle of methadone with him, you know, as his prop. And he contacts me in the midst of all this because the BBC are going to interview him for his book. He said, John, I'm coming to England. Can we meet? And this was all done on an email, but this was done years before. They went through 15 years of my emails, 15 years of my emails. Right. And there was an email from him saying, coming to England, can we meet? And I said, yeah, you're still living as a tramp? He put, yeah. I said, oh, still got the bottle of methadone? He went, yeah. I said, so I'll supply the methadone. You supply the tenant super. We'll sit on a bench and we'll drink a cocktail. That was it. So the Met Police then handed it over as a major crime investigation for me supplying Class A drugs. But that's where it went on that front. I couldn't pay my mortgage. I was working as a labourer on a building site just to get money to pay my bills. The bank came to basically take away my home to do an assessment. And what happened was the woman the bank sent had actually been following the child abuse stuff as it was breaking, sort of circa 2014, 2015. And she'd been in a kids' home and she took total and utter sympathy with me. And she said, look, pay £1 a month and we'll keep your... So whatever people say about the banks, I think they're bad, but there's some good ones. So that's my job. I'm looking at going to prison. The CPS have got 9 files on me, which could get me up to 15 years in prison, maybe, I don't know. I've got no money. I can't pay my mortgage. I'm going to lose my job. So the threat was your home, your job, and the last one, going to was my children. In amongst this, I still am, but back then I was a single parent of 4 children. I don't know if anyone here has ever experienced single parenting, but imagine doing it for 4 kids and being a detective. It's bloody hard work. But now I'm looking at going to prison and I'm worried for my kids, what will happen to them. One of my children was, one of my boys, he left school. He was a professional rugby player, a very, very fit kid. And he was involved in a life-changing, life-threatening accident. And he went into a coma. He was in a coma for months. And this was in the midst of all of this. And I get a call one day from the hospital to attend this hospital, which was miles from my home, a long way from my home. It was in a special neurological unit. And when I get there, there's 3 consultants and they inform me that my child had died, that his heart had stopped, his body had gone into sepsis, and he'd been without heartbeat for 10 minutes. They'd been working on him for 7.5 minutes, 3 consultants. They said, we're really sorry, but we've lost him. However, we've got a brain algorithm, a very small one, and a heart murmur, which clinically means he's not dead, but he is brain dead. His injuries, physical injuries, were so severe anyway that he was paralysed from the eyes down. And they said, we're going to give you 5 days mandatory life support, and then we switched the machine off. So if you can imagine my life now, it's gone from bad to just catastrophic. It's just appalling. I remained by his side for 3 days, and then I took a break while they did personal care, changed tubes and all that. If anyone's ever seen that media footage of Leah Betts, the Essex boy thing, where the young girl taking the overdose of ecstasy and she's got pipes and tubes and all that, that's how my son was. He was on every single life-giving machine, 100% ventilation, 100% this, 100% that. His lungs were blown to pieces through the ventilation. His lungs were damaged now, his spine, everything. It was awful. And I ring up a colleague, and I had a welfare officer appointed, and I said, look, tell my welfare officer that you know, my son they're going to turn the machine off in 2 days. When that happens, I'm not going to be a person any policeman should come near. I said, please tell them just to leave me alone, because they were on me every week, arresting me for something else. And she said, yeah, I'll tell them. She said, I'll make sure it gets to the commissioner. Because the commissioner, Bernard Hogan Howe, taken an interest in my case, and a dirty man anyway. And anyway, that's another matter. But I go and I go into the chapel. This is another story towards my testimony towards Christianity. But I prayed and I prayed like no man's ever prayed. And I said, if Jesus, if you give me my son, I'll do your work. I'll do your bidding. And I went back and my son opened his eyes. I was just going to kiss him goodbye. I was going to walk away, and he woke up. That's another story. But a couple of weeks later, I ended up walking out of the hospital. He went through what they call a miraculous recovery, most amazing transformation, and I thank God every minute of the day for what he's done for my son. But my son was at this point still in this vegetative state, but he was alive. I knew he was going to make it. He opened his eyes and he smiled. So what a miracle. So I drive home exhausted, and as I get home, I'm met by two detectives who arrest me for child abandonment because I left my 15-year-old son home alone with my 23-year-old son, and they arrested me for child. So there's nothing they won't stop at, but something had changed in me. And I just fought back, and I took them on, and I won. My son has survived. Every case went before the CPS, was thrown out, every single case. I was then afforded back all the money for the last 3 years that they hadn't paid me, and I managed to secure my pension, and I went on to have a civil hearing, which has got clauses on it. That's why I can't name these officers, but it won't take a genius to work out who one of them is, and that's it. So that's how I fought back, But that was me, and the police finished. There was no going back after that.
Yeah,
I harboured too much.
Jon, was he part of this civil hearing? Was he reprimanded or?
No, nothing.
So he's still about now, right?
They three of them got pensioned off. One of them had a heart attack, which I was happy to hear, and that was that. They sank into. They wouldn't even turn up at the civil hearing. They refused to turn up, and the commissioner refused to give a statement as well. So it was an absolute farce. But yeah, no, nothing was ever done. There was luckily, because I got so much support, there was a letter writing campaign, and Cressida the Dick, there was I think 16,000 letters were written to her for justice for what I went through. So there was a bit of a backlash, and of course I then become very vocal about it, very public about what had happened within my capabilities. So I like to think that I was a bit of a catalyst in maybe restoring a bit of public faith, because there are some good coppers out there, and I get a lot from survivors that say, we're glad there's people like you out there. But also it made them shake up, and as a result, whether it's direct or indirect, the police now have a dedicated unit looking at this problem. And I was asked to represent the government at the recent inquiry, and as a result now 5 points of my evidence have to be implemented as points of law now in regard to child safeguarding. So it has made a difference. But
good.
Anyone,
well, Jon, this has been an absolute fucking roller coaster. Let's be honest. We've blown through nearly an hour and a half of our allotted 1 hour time slot. So we're just going to have to cut most of that. No, I'm joking. But it's been amazing.
It's heavy, isn't it?
Yeah,
so
knackering,
heavy.
feels way beyond my pay grade, as I mentioned, and everyone's kicking off in the chat. So
yeah, we'll have we need to wrap this up, Jon. Thanks for your time though, and I'll put a link in the show notes for your website. Do you want to briefly tell us a bit about your website before we play ourselves out?
Yeah, I mean, I did have the Jon Wedger Foundation, but I had a lot of survivors working with me, and it sort of all went a bit wrong. So I won't be doing that again. I sort of work on my own now, but I'm very freelance. I've got a campaign called Voice for the Voiceless. people can get me at jonwedgerfoundation@gmail.com. I take testimonies of people that have come through child abuse. I like to have a happy ending. I just interviewed a girl who managed to get her father convicted for abusing her, and it's it's as happy an ending as you can get. And because I think that it empowers people, and it shows that there is life after child abuse, and it's a form of justice. And it basically, like we said earlier on, why don't people know about it? Well, doing things like this will make people know about it. I try and stay away from conspiracies. They can drag you into a very dark place, so I try to keep everything factual. So it's Voice for the Voiceless. You can get me on YouTube. I'm going to be doing a campaign in August. I do these endurance sponsorship things. I've cycled, I've walked with my dog from London to Manchester, I've swam around the Scilly Isles and all these silly things. But I'm cycling an old post office bike from Parliament, trying to get to Perth, to Fornethi Kids Home in
Australia.
Summer. And I want to interview people on way, so I'll probably be going up the east side, up the A1 route. So if there's anyone throughout the counties on way that want me to stop, a bit of a roadshow when I do your interview. I do everything live.
Cool.
There's no belt braces and string. I do it on my own. There's a lot of people won't go nowhere near live stuff, but it's always been all right. And that's it really. I'm a bit like a submarine. What I'll do is I'll come up, do a bit of work, then I'll go under for a little while, and then I'll resurface. So and I have to keep the ego in check as well. That's the other thing. That's a very dangerous thing. You see it with a lot of podcasters. They get very wealthy, very well known, and their ego goes through the roof. I suffered that. I suffered that many years ago, and I will never be that person ever again. I want to be humble now, and I just want to get the word out there. But there is life after child abuse. It's not your shame to carry. It says speak out, tell the truth. I want to say God bless to all victims and survivors. Please empower others. There's a lot of people that are in a dark place that need to hear it. And I want to, this sounds strange, but I want to give a call out to paedophiles to say, stop it. Stop doing what you're doing. It may have been done to you, but now you're doing it to others. You're destroying lives. You're destroying souls. It'll only end in tears. Stop it. I call out to you. Stop it now. Give yourself up. Tell God, go to Jesus, do whatever, go to the police, but stop doing it now. And that's it, gentlemen. And thank you so much for giving me your platform. And it's been an absolute pleasure being on there. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, links in the show notes if you want to follow up with John. Click through to the website. And thanks for your time, John. I'll drop you an email tomorrow. All right, mate.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Phil. God bless.
Yeah, see you next time, whenever that will be.
It'll be a pleasure.
Yeah, we're going to... I think we need like about a 15-minute break.
At least. All right.
To just sort of like...
John is gone.
Yeah, he's gone. That's intense. It was intense. We'll be back in 15 minutes for part 2.
Yeah. I will see you then.
Bye.
See you then.